So, the question is, what side are you on? And you might ask, well, what is the good? What is bad? And if you look at the ethical code of Zoroastrians at the very beginning that I gave you, good thoughts, good words, good deeds, sumata huktavarshta, you might wonder what the details about that are. And what a Zoroastrian will tell you is, listen, most people know what a good thought is and what a good deed is. I mean, most people know. Kids might not, but once they grow up, they'll know. You don't lie to people. You don't act like a dick. Very, very simple things. And they acknowledge that there are people that are not quite right. I mean, in the sense that they don't quite get the difference between good and bad. And within the religion, there are prescriptions for how you deal with that and how you decide under different circumstances what a good thing is and a bad thing is, given circumstances. Now, during the Sasanian period, when everything became codified and, religious fanatics like Herder were obsessed with ritual and ethical purity, some of the prescriptions became rather bizarre, and they were trying to divide between, clean and not unclean animals and clean and unclean food, and it just, got kind of crazy. Most Zoroastrians aren't quite that intense about it anymore. Although there are some ritual prescriptions, which I will show you instances of in a moment. But basically, the overall ethical principle is to always seek in your intention, at the very least, to have good thoughts, words, and deeds. Because if you have that as your intention, then and with help, you'll figure it out. You basically don't want to lie. There may be times when, if you don't lie, somebody might die. And so there are different ways of understanding that. What's interesting is that in India, the Parsis are renowned for their honesty in business. And because of that, they don't lie, oftentimes even to their own detriment. And because of that, they are often entrusted with very, very delicate social situations, business situations, and government administrative situations where they mediate difficult things because they won't lie. So, and they've become a very wealthy community because of how they are generous to each other and generous in business. People trust them, so they will come and do business with them. So these ethical prescriptions have, as far as they're concerned, very real physical manifested components. And that's what ethical dualism is. In every situation you can figure out at least something right to do, Ontological means that at the beginning of time, as far as we know, there were these two forces, the good force and the bad force. So now we'll talk about some of the important rituals, and this does not exhaust them. This is just to give sort of a basic overview. Probably the ritual that they're most known for are the lighting of sacred fires. And this is because Ashavahishta is an Amesha Spenta. He's the guardian of fire. And as I mentioned, he is the interface between the divine realm or the spiritual realm and the physical realm. And a physical manifestation of Ahura Mazda. So the lighting of fires is very important. Traditionally, there have been three kinds of fires: hearth fires for the home, forge fires for the making of tools and perhaps weapons, and then the temple fire. And the temple fires are the most extensive and the most complex from a ceremonial standpoint. Each has their own ceremony and special woods that are used. In fact, in temple fires, I mean, lots of different types of woods are brought together. Fragrant woods are brought together, including sandalwood, cedars, things like this, in order to create not only a large fire and a beautiful fire, but a fragrant fire. And temple fires are kept burning continuously as much as they can. There are some temple fires that have been burning now for 1,000 years. And this is very similar to the ceremonial fires that are burning in certain ceremonial places and temples, say in Varanasi in India, where some fires have been burning for probably 2 millennia. And of course, if the place has to be cleaned, then what they'll do is they'll take like one log or one set of embers and preserve those, and then light the next ceremonial fire from that, which basically means the fire has been burning continuously. So it's not like it's always burning in large flames continuously. And there are a number of seasonal festivals that are observed, and I'm only going to show you here some festivals that are still observed by Iranians as part of their Zoroastrian heritage. Zoroastrians have a lot more festivals than this, but these are ones that are observed by Iranians and are kind of semi-official. Some of them are official celebrations in Iran even today. And the most important one is Nowruz, which is the New Year's ceremony, and it begins on the spring equinox and lasts for about 2 weeks, about 13 days. And there are a number of sub-festivals within Nowruz, including Sezda Badar, which is the Day of Joy, and Merigan, which is the Day of Thanksgiving. And then there's Jashin Asada, which is the midwinter festival to honor fire and defeating the power of darkness. So it's connected, obviously, to Vigil, that's the biggest night of the year, and how that's ending. And then right before New Year's, you have the Jahan Shanbi Suri, which is the festival of fire. And fires are lit to celebrate the end of the previous year. So even though these are old Zoroastrian observances, you will find them being observed in Iran. And in fact, during the period of Nowruz in Iran, the entire city of Tehran shuts down. I mean, the government of Iran will even shut down their official website. I've tried to, and they'll have this notice that say it's Nowruz, and so everybody celebrates it. It's common. And this table here, the ceremonial table that you see on the right, this is a traditional haft scene table, and it contains representations or expressions of all of the Ameshaspenta, including Ashavahishta and various of the others, the guardian of plants, the guardian of waters, etc. There are usually painted eggs on the table, because eggs have always been a traditional symbol of rebirth in Iran, even like way before Rome or Easter eggs. You see apples on this particular table because apples are actually a traditional food throughout much of northern Iran into places like Azerbaijan, because Azerbaijan is where all apples genetically originated. So there you go. You have here roses. Roses were first cultivated by Iranians, so that's also a very traditional Iranian offering, if you will. There are some scholars who believe that the Haftzin table was what gave rise to the Passover Seder plate among Jews. You don't hear about there being a plate like that in the Torah. But all of a sudden, when the Jews came back from exile, they were doing Passover Seder plates. We don't know exactly when those Seder plates began to be used. But the resemblance to the Haftzin, which is a much older ceremonial table, is suggestive. And, like I said, there are the Asadas. Now, the Asadas are witnesses to the goodness in the created world. And there are all kinds of Asadas. There's Anahita, which we have mentioned. Various of the fixed stars, like Sirius, for example, are considered to be Asadas. There are the 4 fixed royal stars of the traditional, they're called the Royal Persian stars. In Zoroastrian or Mazdian, as it's often called, astrology. Mountains can be Asadas. Occasional animals can be Asadas, like certain types of dogs might be Asadas under certain circumstances. Trees, places. You've probably heard of the god Mithra or Mitra. He's also considered Asada. He's a pre-Zoroastrian deity that you also find actually in Vedic sources. So he's obviously a very old deity. but he is considered a Asada, and his worship, or a variety of his worship, actually spread to the Roman Empire among certain of the Roman legions at a particular time. It's considered that there are 101 names for Ahura Mazda, and many of these describe natural processes. So it is thought that perhaps that these were divine beings or Asada, and they became absorbed or understood as being aspects of Ahura Mazda itself. I want to say himself, but it's actually itself. And here you have a lovely picture of a stream in a wooded area with rocks, and that stream itself, if it was considered important to the locals, might itself be considered a Asada. It's a witness to the goodness in the created world. And then the Zoroastrians traditionally did something very, very interesting in death. They practiced a form of sky burial, and they used these structures that were called the Adachma, or the towers of silence. And basically a purified body, purified being washed body, would be taken to these towers and placed in chambers. Basically, these are open to the sky, to be eaten by vultures. And once dry, the bones were then thrown into a central pit. And after those bones dried and became dust over time, there was usually like that pit was connected to like a water course, and water would be used to wash the dust away. And this way of disposing of the dead was done to prevent polluting earth, fire, or water in the disposal of the body. And often vultures themselves were considered Asadas because they were doing the sacred work of helping the body to disperse. Now, in Iran, Muslims forbade the use of the towers. So now the dead are buried in such a way that the bodies do not contact the ground as much as possible. And in India, there's emerged the unfortunate situation that the decline of vulture populations have led to a crisis in Parsi communities about how to deal with the dead that are then left to rot, which of course was never the point. And the other problem has been is that oftentimes these adachmas were put sort of, on the edge of town, like in what we would now call the suburbs. But as urban sprawl, like in places like Delhi, have caused people to move out to these areas where these adachma are, what has happened in some instances is that new apartment buildings have been built that are actually higher than the towers. And so, you're facing situations where people are looking out their windows and looking down into these open pits where these rotting bodies are. And of course, that's not very pleasant. So this has actually led the Parsis to engage in various environmental attempts towards environmental legislation to try to figure out why the vultures are declining, to try to bring them back. It turns out, of course, part of why they were declining is that they were eating toxic things, animals and refuse, carrion, that had been poisoned by toxic substances, and it was creating a crisis in their ability to reproduce. And so Zoroastrians have been engaged in environmental efforts to bring the vultures back so that they could help dispose of their dead and also just help the natural world. And I'm going to finish this segment up by just showing you an interior design of a large adachma. Basically, it's cylindrical in shape. It's open to the sky. You have these several places where you can enter it. And then you have these chambers, as you see here on the right, where bodies are placed. And the vultures lining the top, waiting their chance to go and have a meal. And in fact, there have been some photos that I've seen more recently in places where they've succeeded in bringing some of the vultures back, where people are leading, people are carrying a body to be laid out, and there's a line of vultures following them, waiting for them to put the body down. So at least we hope that some of the efforts of the Parsis to bring the vulture population back are succeeding. But anyway, this is how this form of sky burial worked.